Prison food secrets they never wanted you to know. The tray slid through the slot with a loud clang. At first, the inmates thought it was just another bland meal, but when they peeled open the bread, a wave of nausea swept the block. The loaf was green with mold, soft and wet inside like rotten sponge. The guard stood outside, stone-faced, watching the prisoners gag and curse. One inmate, desperate with hunger, still tried to eat. His lips cracked as he chewed, his stomach turning, and moments later he vomited right there on the floor. The others shouted, banging on their cell doors, demanding answers. But this wasn't an accident. The mold wasn't new. It was routine. And the truth? These food secrets were never meant to leave the walls of the prison. Now the question hangs in the air. If this is what they serve in plain sight, what other food secrets are hidden deep inside the system? Meals that break you. Prison food has always been about control, not nutrition. Inmates across America whisper stories of strange meat with no label, soup that tastes like bleach, and bread that arrives crawling with insects. But nothing compares to the mystery loaf. In some prisons, they call it Loaf. On paper, it's a disciplinary meal. In reality, it's a weapon. Guards mash leftovers, vegetables, beans, sometimes even spoiled meat, into a brick. Then they bake it until it's hard as concrete. It's served cold, without seasoning, without choice. Prisoners forced to eat it say it tastes like punishment, not food. Some pass out from hunger after refusing it. Others break down and eat every bite just to survive. The humiliation is the point. It tells them you have no power, not even over your next meal. But one night at a prison in the Midwest, things went too far. An entire cell block was put on Nutrilo for days straight. On the fourth day, one inmate, already weak, shaking from hunger, collapsed. His head hit the concrete floor with a sickening crack. The Chow line froze. Everyone stared. The guards didn't move at first. The secret was out. This wasn't just punishment anymore. It was torture. The hidden kitchen. Behind the locked doors of the prison kitchen, secrets fester. Most inmates never see it, but the ones assigned to kitchen duty know exactly what goes on. Boxes arrive with no labels. Sometimes the meat inside is gray before it's even cooked. Vegetables rot in damp crates, covered in slime. And when food runs out, guards order kitchen workers to scrape old trays, mix the scraps, and re-serve them as fresh meals. One kitchen worker remembered opening a giant pot, only to find a rat floating in the stew. The cook, a guard in uniform, fished it out with a ladle, shrugged, and ordered the pot to keep boiling. By lunch, the stew was ladled onto trays as if nothing had happened. Most prisoners never knew. They just ate, sick to their stomachs, too hungry to refuse. But one day, the secret slipped. A batch of contaminated meat was served across the entire block. Hours later, men doubled over in pain, clutching their stomachs. Some vomited in their cells, others collapsed in the yard. The air reeked of sickness. And that night, when medical staff couldn't keep up, the prison went into lockdown. The truth was clear. The kitchen itself had become a weapon. The starvation tactic. Sometimes, the cruelest food secret isn't what they serve. It's what they don't. In one notorious prison, breakfast never came. No trays. No lines. Nothing. Prisoners pressed their faces to the bars, waiting for the rattle of wheels in the corridor. But nothing slid through the slots. By noon, whispers turned to shouting. By evening, men pounded their fists against the steel. But still no food. The warden had turned hunger into a weapon. The rule was simple. Cause trouble, and the whole block goes hungry. By the second day, men were too weak to stand. Some fought each other for scraps of crackers hidden under mattresses, or gnawed at old candy bars saved from commissary. The air filled with the sound of groans, curses, and fists hitting metal. On the third day, desperation broke the silence. A group of inmates charged the chow hall doors, smashing them open with pure rage and hunger. They stormed the kitchen, ripping bags of flour and frozen meat apart with their bare hands. Guards flooded in with batons swinging. But this wasn't just another riot. This was survival. The message was clear. When food disappears, so does control. The poison in the tray. After the starvation incident, things calmed, at least on the surface. Trays began sliding through the slots again. The smell of food returned to the cell block, thin soups and powdered potatoes filling the air. Prisoners ate in silence, too drained to cause trouble. But whispers spread fast. Some swore the food tasted strange. Soups that burned the throat, meat that made lips numb. Others joked darkly that the guards were seasoning the meals with chemicals. One night, an inmate known as Red took a spoonful of beans, then froze. His face twisted in pain, eyes wide. He dropped to the ground, clawing at his stomach. Within minutes, 2 more inmates fell, convulsing on the floor. The block erupted. Men shouted for help, banging on doors. Guards finally dragged the collapsed inmates out, their trays left behind on the ground, beans still steaming. No one knew what had been in the food. Some believed it was spoiled supplies. Others whispered something darker, that the kitchen was experimenting, using prisoners as test subjects. What mattered was simple. After that night, nobody trusted their tray again. The food trade war. When trust in the prison trays vanished, a new system began to rise. Inside, food became more than survival. It became money, power, and control. Ramen noodles, candy bars, even packs of ketchup turned into currency. An extra soup packet could buy protection. A honey bun could pay off a debt. Inmates built entire black markets out of food, trading it like gold. But when something is valuable in prison, it becomes dangerous. Rival groups began fighting for control of the food trade. The Chow hall turned into a battlefield of looks and whispers, each bite of commissary watched by hungry eyes. Then, one night, it exploded. An argument over a stolen pack of ramen spiraled out of control. A fistfight broke out in the cell block, but it didn't stop there. Shanks flashed. Blood spilled. Guards rushed in, pepper spray choking the air. Prisoners screamed, slipping on spilled soup and crushed chips scattered across the floor. All of it over a 25-cent pack of noodles. The food trade had become a war, and in prison, war never ends clean. The meals that break the mind. Not every weaponized meal is about hunger or trade. Some are about humiliation. In one prison, guards introduced a new punishment. Every inmate who stepped out of line would eat only the disciplinary loaf. It was a hard, gray brick made from mashed beans, flour, and scraps of leftovers. No seasoning. No choice. Served cold. Prisoners called it the brick, and they said it didn't just starve the body, it broke the mind. Some gagged on every bite. Others refused to eat until their ribs showed through their skin. One man, locked on a loaf for weeks, began tearing his mattress apart and chewing on the stuffing just to trick his stomach. Another smeared the loaf across his walls in rage, spelling out the words, "I am not an animal." But the breaking point came when a young inmate, barely 20, was caught refusing the loaf 3 days in a row. Weak, trembling, he begged for real food. Instead, the guards locked him in a cell with only water and the loaf on the floor, like feeding a dog. Hours later, he collapsed. His body gave out before his spirit did. That night, the whole block erupted, because the inmates realized the loaf wasn't just punishment. It was designed to destroy them. The corruption on the menu. For years, prisoners whispered that the food budget wasn't really for them. On paper, the state spent millions feeding inmates. But in reality, much of that money vanished long before it reached the kitchen. Suppliers cut corners, sending boxes of expired meat and dented cans. Some even relabeled old stock and sold it as fresh. Guards signed off, knowing they'd get their share of the profit. Inmates noticed. The chicken looked gray, the milk sour before it hit the tray. Bread crumbled like dust. And yet, day after day, it kept coming. One kitchen worker finally spoke up. He claimed that deliveries meant for the prison were being resold on the outside, while inmates ate whatever was left behind. "We're eating garbage so someone else can get rich," he told a fellow prisoner. Then came the proof. A truck meant to deliver crates of fresh produce never arrived. Later, word spread. The same crates had been spotted at a supermarket in town, stamped with the prison seal. When the story reached the inmates, the block went silent. They realized every hunger pain, every sickness, every rotten bite wasn't just neglect. It was theft, and the rage that built from that secret was about to spill over, turning the Chow Hall into the stage for one of the prison's most explosive uprisings. The Chow Hall Uprising. It began with silence. The trays came down the line, watery soup, stale bread, gray meat. The same lies, the same poison. Inmates sat, staring at the food, their fists tight, their jaws locked. Nobody moved. Nobody ate. Then one man stood. He lifted his tray high and slammed it against the floor. The crash echoed like a gunshot. Within seconds, dozens followed. Trays smashing, food flying, the air filling with shouts and roars. Guards rushed in, swinging batons, barking orders. But the inmates didn't back down this time. They hurled trays like shields, chairs crashing against the walls. Some climbed onto tables, screaming for justice. The Chow Hall turned into a battlefield, the smell of rotten food mixing with sweat and blood. One inmate grabbed the microphone used for announcements and shouted, "We are not animals. We are starving while they steal our food." His voice boomed across the prison before guards ripped him down. In the chaos, alarms blared. Riot gear units stormed the hall, shields and pepper spray cutting through the crowd. Inmates coughed, blinded, choking. But they kept fighting, fueled by anger, by hunger, by years of secrets finally boiling over. And when the smoke cleared, the tables were overturned, blood stained the concrete, and dozens of prisoners lay on the ground in cuffs. But one thing was undeniable. The secret was no longer hidden. The world outside would have to listen. The investigation nobody wanted. After the Chow Hall uprising, the prison went on lockdown. Doors slammed shut, lights flickered, and silence filled the tiers. The warden wanted control back, but the riot had already shaken the system. Soon, news of the food revolt leaked beyond the walls. Families of inmates began calling, demanding answers. Local reporters sniffed around, chasing rumors of spoiled meat and starvation tactics. The prison tried to bury it, claiming it was just discipline. But the truth was too loud. A small team of investigators was sent inside. They walked the kitchen, clipboards in hand, snapping photos of moldy bread and bins of spoiled vegetables. But what they found hidden in the storeroom stopped them cold. Boxes stamped, "Not for human consumption," stacked neatly against the wall. That was the food being served. When word spread to the inmates, the block erupted again, not in violence this time, but in something more dangerous to the prison: unity. Prisoners from rival groups began whispering together, sharing stories, writing letters, and sending them out to journalists and lawyers. The guards could handle a fight. They could handle hunger strikes. But this was exposure, and exposure meant danger, because the prison system had more to lose than just food secrets. It had its entire reputation hanging in the balance, the secrets they tried to bury. The investigation should have ended it. The photos, the boxes, the reports, it was enough to shake the system. But instead of reform, the prison fought back. First, the investigators were silenced. Their report was labeled confidential, locked away where the public would never see it. Families who demanded answers got form letters and hang-ups. The warden told his staff, "Business as usual." Then the food suddenly changed. For a week, meals looked cleaner, fresher bread, fruit on trays, even milk cartons that weren't sour. But it was all a show. The moment the spotlight moved, the trays went back to watery soup and mystery meat. Inside, inmates felt the weight of betrayal. They had risked their lives in that uprising, only to see nothing change. Rage boiled beneath the surface, hotter than before. And then came the warning. One night, a kitchen worker was caught whispering to a reporter on the phone. Hours later, he was found beaten in the showers, barely conscious, his jaw shattered so he could never speak again. Word spread through the block. "They'll kill to keep the secret." From that moment on, every tray slid to the slot carried more than food. It carried fear. Because prisoners now understood the truth. The food wasn't just about survival. It was about silence. The meal that exposed it all. The prison thought fear would quiet the block. Beating, silence, and rotten food were supposed to bury the truth. But then came the meal that changed everything. One morning, trays slid through as usual. On them, a strange-looking stew, thick and dark, with a sour smell that clung to the air. Prisoners hesitated. Some refused to touch it. Others, too hungry to resist, began eating. Minutes later, chaos erupted. Inmate after inmate doubled over, vomiting, clutching their stomachs. Some collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. Guards rushed in, dragging bodies out of cells. The medical wing overflowed, and this time it couldn't be hidden. Word reached families within hours. The local hospital reported treating inmates with food poisoning. News stations caught the story, flashing headlines. Mass illness at state prison. Tainted food suspected. Reporters demanded answers. Lawyers filed lawsuits. The prison was cornered. For the first time, the system couldn't deny it anymore. What had once been whispered secrets about moldy bread, stolen food budgets, and punishment loaves was now undeniable evidence, broadcast to the outside world. But inside the prison, the fallout was different. Inmates saw the poisoning not as an accident, but as a message that said, "You will eat what we give you, even if it kills you." The boiling point. The food poisoning scandal shook the outside world. News cameras circled the prison gates. Families protested with signs, and lawyers promised justice. For the first time, the public was watching closely. But inside the walls, nothing changed. The trays kept sliding through the slots. The same watery soup, the same gray meat, the same moldy bread, and the anger grew. Inmates who once fought each other now found themselves united by hunger and betrayal. They whispered plans through vents, passed notes under doors, and built alliances across groups that never spoke before. The guards sensed it. They doubled patrols, cracked down harder, and searched cells for contraband. But the tension was already too thick, like a storm gathering in silence. Then, during one dinner service, it snapped. A prisoner bit into his cornbread and found a cockroach baked inside. He stood up, lifted the loaf high, and screamed across the chow hall, "They're feeding us filth!" The room exploded. Dozens of inmates flipped their trays, food flying through the air. The sound of steel and fists clashing echoed off the walls. Guards stormed in with batons and pepper spray, but the inmates fought back, hurling chairs and trays, some even charging the kitchen. The riot was bigger than before, louder, angrier, unstoppable. It wasn't about one bad meal anymore. It was about years of secrets finally boiling over. And as smoke grenades filled the hall, one truth became clear. This wasn't just a fight for food anymore. It was a fight for dignity. The darkest secret on the menu. The riot ended with cuffs, bruises, and blood smeared across the chow hall floor. Dozens of inmates were dragged to solitary. Others lay in infirmary, beaten and broken. The prison thought the storm had passed. But it hadn't. In the chaos, one inmate assigned to kitchen duty slipped out with something hidden under his shirt, a stack of documents taken from the warden's office. They weren't recipes. They weren't menus. They were invoices. And what those papers showed was worse than anyone imagined. Shipments of meat stamped, not for human consumption. Expired products bought at a fraction of the cost. Contracts proving that the prison was pocketing food money, feeding inmates garbage so staff and suppliers could split the difference. The inmate smuggled the papers out, piece by piece, through letters to his family. Within weeks, copies landed in the hands of journalists. And when the headlines broke, they sent shockwaves across the state. Prisoners fed food unfit for humans. Millions stolen from food budget while inmates starve. The world finally saw it. What prisoners had been screaming for years. But inside the walls, the reaction was terrifying. Guards raided cells, ripped apart mattresses, and searched every inch for evidence. Inmates who were suspected of leaking the truth were dragged to the hole, beaten, silenced. The system wasn't just hiding food secrets anymore. It was waging war against anyone who dared to reveal them. The punishment loaf. When the leaked documents hit the news, the prison turned brutal. The warden needed control back, and he knew exactly how to strike. Through the food, the regular trays disappeared. No more bread, no more soup, no more meat. In their place came a single, solid brick dropped into cells 3 times a day. They called it disciplinary loaf. On paper, it was legal. A mix of beans, flour, powdered milk, and scraps baked into a hard block. In reality, it was psychological warfare. The loaf tasted like cardboard, dry and bitter. It made prisoners gag, choke, and sometimes vomit. Some tried to soak it in water to soften it. Others smashed it against the floor in rage. But the worst part? It broke the spirit. Inmates began refusing to eat at all. Men grew weak, trembling in their bunks. Fights slowed. Whispers faded. The silence was almost worse than the riots. And then it happened. A young inmate, only 21, was kept on the loaf for weeks. His weight dropped, his cheeks hollowed, his ribs sharp against the skin. One morning, the guards found him collapsed in his cell, the uneaten loaf still sitting untouched on the floor. The block fell into a chilling quiet, because the prisoners now knew food wasn't just punishment. It could be a death sentence. The cover-up cracks. The death couldn't be hidden. Word leaked fast, first to the family, then to reporters, and soon the story spread like fire. The official report called it complications from pre-existing health conditions. But everyone inside knew the truth. The loaf had broken him. This time, outside pressure came hard. Human rights groups demanded entry. State officials announced a new inspection. The prison had no choice but to open its doors, at least on the surface. When investigators walked into the kitchen, the staff scrambled to put on a show. Fresh fruit on counters, clean trays stacked neatly, boxes labeled with proper dates. But the inmates knew it was all staged. They whispered through the bars, checked the storeroom, checked the dumpsters. And when inspectors dug deeper, the truth bled out. Rotting meat stored under leaky pipes. Bread so moldy it crumbled to dust at the touch. A freezer packed with expired supplies stamped, "Not safe for sale." The photos made their way to the press. Public outrage exploded. Families gathered outside the prison gates with signs reading, "They're starving our sons," and "Prison food equals human rights." But behind the walls, the warden grew colder. Guards barked louder. Trays came with less food than before. It was retaliation, pure and simple, a warning to inmates. The more the world knows, the more you will suffer. And then, one night, an entire block opened their trays to find nothing inside, just an empty slot. The silence that followed was more dangerous than any riot, because the prisoners knew the real battle over food had only just begun. The empty tray revolt. The night the trays came back empty, the block froze. No soup, no bread, no loaf, just silence and hollow stomachs. It wasn't neglect, it was deliberate, a message written in hunger. At first, the inmates waited, thinking maybe it was a mistake. Hours passed. Nothing came. By dawn, the whispers began. "They're starving us on purpose." By noon, anger turned to fire. Men pounded on their doors, fists rattling steel. Others screamed down the tier, voices echoing, "We want food! We want food!" When guards finally appeared, they carried batons instead of trays. They ordered silence. Instead, the noise grew louder. Prisoners kicked doors, hurled insults, flooded the block with noise until the concrete shook. Then it broke. One inmate ripped a steel leg from his bunk and smashed the cell window, shards flying. Others began setting fire to scraps of clothing, smoke curling through the vents. The block became a furnace of rage. Guards rushed in with riot shields, spraying pepper gas into cells. Men coughed and gagged, but the chanting continued. "Food! Food! Food!" The smell of gas mixed with smoke, turning the air into poison. And in the chaos, something happened the prison never expected. Rival groups, men who hated each other for years, began shouting together. For once, gangs stood united. Because hunger doesn't care about color, numbers, or turf. The uprising was no longer about just one meal. It was about survival, and the system's darkest food secret was now impossible to hide. The fire spreads. The revolt didn't stay contained. Word travels fast inside prison walls. Through letters, through guards who talk too much, through whispers at visiting hours. Soon, inmates hundreds of miles away were talking about the same thing. Rotten bread, poisoned stew, punishment loaves, empty trays. The secrets weren't secrets anymore. They were stories, shared and repeated, louder each time. Then, the chain reaction began. At prison in the South, inmates refused their meals, pushing trays back through the slots untouched. In the Midwest, a hunger strike spread through 3 entire blocks. On the East Coast, another chow hall exploded when men found maggots wriggling inside their food. The system scrambled to shut it down. Officials called the revolts isolated incidents. Press releases blamed inmates for faking sickness or destroying their own meals. But the evidence kept leaking: photos, letters, medical records. Families posted them online, and soon millions of people outside were demanding answers. Inside, the guards grew harsher. Pepper spray, lockdowns, solitary confinement. But the punishments only fueled more resistance. Because now, prisoners realized they weren't just fighting for better food. They were fighting to be seen as human. And when one prison lit its chow hall on fire, smoke billowing into night sky, visible for miles, the world could no longer look away. The scandal had become too big, too loud, too dangerous to ignore. Prison food was no longer a hidden secret. It was a national crisis. The last weapon. The national spotlight was blinding. Protests outside prison gates grew larger. News anchors repeated the scandals every night, and lawmakers demanded hearings. For the first time, the system was under real pressure. But inside the walls, the fight grew darker. The warden and his staff knew they were being watched, yet they refused to give in. Instead, they reached for one last weapon: food itself. Meals shrank to half portions. Soups came watered down until they were nothing but cloudy liquid. Meat disappeared altogether, replaced by tasteless soy patties. Every bite was designed to remind the inmates, "We still control you." And then came the cruelest twist. A new special meal appeared. Officials called it a nutritionally balanced substitute. Inmates called it the paste. It was a beige, flavorless sludge squeezed from plastic packets, with no smell, no texture, just fuel to keep them barely alive. Prisoners stared at it in horror. Some refused to touch it. Others forced it down, gagging, tears in their eyes. It wasn't just about hunger anymore. It was about stripping away the last piece of humanity. The block grew silent, broken, beaten down by the paste. But silence doesn't last forever, because in that moment of despair, a dangerous truth settled in. If food could be used to destroy them, then maybe food could also be the spark to finally fight back, for good. The spark in the paste. The beige paste was meant to crush them. No flavor, no dignity. Just a cold reminder that prisoners weren't people. They were bodies to be managed. At first, the block sank into silence. Men sat on bunks, squeezing the packets, forcing the sludge into their mouths just to survive. But silence in prison is dangerous, because it means something is building. And it was. One night, a lifer named Torres stood up in the chow hall. He held the plastic packet high in the air and shouted, "This isn't food. This is slavery." His voice cracked, but it carried. Inmates rose one by one, dropping their packets onto the floor. The sound of plastic hitting concrete echoed like drum beats. The guards barked orders, but the men didn't sit down. They didn't fight. They stood shoulder to shoulder, refusing to eat. The hunger strike spread, first the block, then the whole prison. Hundreds of inmates from every background, from rival gangs, united by one thing: they would not eat the paste. Outside, the story caught fire. Photos of the packets leaked. The beige sludge smeared across trays. Headlines screamed, "Prisoners refuse to eat human pet food." Human rights groups called it torture. Families rallied louder. Inside, the warden panicked. The strike threatened to spiral out of control. Guards tightened lockdowns, cutting water, cutting showers, but the prisoners held strong. Because for the first time, they weren't just refusing a meal. They were refusing to be broken. The breaking point. The hunger strike spread like wildfire. Day after day, the trays went untouched. Plastic packets piled in corners, turning sour, attracting flies. The air grew heavy with the smell of rotting paste. But the prisoners held their ground. By the third day, men staggered when they walked. By the fifth, Some collapsed in their cells, lips cracked, bodies trembling. Guards dragged them out on stretchers. But still the strike continued. The warden thought pain would end it. Instead, it only fueled it. Every man who collapsed became a symbol. Every stretcher that rolled past the bars was a reminder that they were united. On the seventh day, the tipping point arrived. A group of inmates in the Chow hall pushed their untouched trays back through the slot and stood in silence, arms crossed. The guards shouted, moved in with batons. And then it happened. Dozens of prisoners dropped to the floor, lying flat on the concrete, refusing to move. One by one, the entire hall followed until the ground was covered wall to wall with bodies. It wasn't a riot. It wasn't violence. It was defiance. From above, the guards saw hundreds of men lying still silent, starving but unbroken. And outside, the images hit the news. Helicopters flew over the prison yard, cameras capturing men spelling words on the ground with their bodies. We are hungry. The nation could no longer look away, because this wasn't just a prison scandal anymore. It was a human rights crisis, and the darkest prison food secrets were finally, undeniably exposed. The aftermath of silence. The image of prisoners lying shoulder to shoulder on the concrete burned across television screens worldwide. Commentators called it the silent rebellion. Human rights groups compared it to historic hunger strikes. For the first time in decades, the voices of the voiceless had broken through. Inside, the prison shook with tension. Guards stalked the tiers with riot gear, barking orders louder than ever. The warden locked down entire blocks, cutting visits, phone calls, even letters. His goal was simple: isolate and crush the resistance. But it was too late. The story had escaped. Lawmakers demanded hearings. Journalists swarmed the gates. Families held up the packets of beige pacer cameras, shouting, "Would you feed this to your child?" Under pressure, the Department of Corrections made promises: new food contracts, outside inspections, oversight committees. But inside, the inmates laughed bitterly. They knew the system wasn't built to change overnight. Still, the strike had left its mark. Rival gangs that once fought each other now shared trust built in hunger. Men who had nothing in common now nodded in solidarity. The pace had broken their bodies, but in a strange way it had fed their unity. And then came the biggest shock of all. A whistleblower from inside the prison system. An employee leaked hundreds of pages of documents to the press. They detailed years of fraud, contracts with shady suppliers, and explicit instructions to cut corners at the cost of inmate health. The darkest secret was out in black and white. Prison food wasn't broken by accident. It was broken by design. When the world finally looked, the leak hit like a thunderclap. Front pages screamed with headlines: "Prison food fraud exposed." Millions stolen. Inmates fed trash. Talk shows debated it. Politicians scrambled to act outraged. For once, the suffering inside the walls had spilled fully into the streets outside. Courtrooms filled with lawyers waving the leaked contracts. Families testified, holding up photos of their loved ones who had grown sick or died behind bars. Committees called hearings. Cameras flashed. Promises of reform filled the air. Inside, the prisoners watched on tiny televisions, listening through static. Some shook their heads, too hardened to believe change would come. Others dared to hope. For years, their stomachs had been used as weapons. Moldy bread, poison stew, disciplinary loaves. Beige paste meant to break the soul. Every secret had been buried under silence, fear, and steel. Now the world finally looked. But change inside prisons moved slower than chains dragged across concrete. The system fought to protect itself, even as the evidence piled up. And prisoners knew tomorrow's tray could still hold the same sludge, the same mold, the same lies. Yet something had shifted forever. The uprising, the strike, the leak, those stories couldn't be buried again. The secrets were out. The world knew. And once the world knows, it can never unsee. The bitter truth. Prison food was never just food. It was control. It was punishment. It was silence served on a tray. For decades, the system believed it could keep those secrets locked away. hidden behind razor wire and stone. But hunger is louder than steel. And when men are pushed to the edge, starved, poisoned, humiliated, truth has a way of breaking through. The question now isn't whether the secrets are known. It's whether anyone will care enough to change them. Because behind every locked door, another tray still slides through the slot. And what's on that tray could mean the difference between survival and despair. This was Prison Food Secrets They Never Wanted You to Know.